Come over here, I got something to show you.
Hello, my name is Ben, and I want to tell you something. I want to tell you about the books that I read in September of 2021. Yes, how is everybody? I hope everyone is all right in the pre-apocalypse. So this month we've got a bit of a theme again. We're going into the ancient world. Right, so basically, Kieran from KD Books and myself are going to be reading the Divine Comedy. So we're budding reading it, and we're kind of doing a read along as well. So we're sort of, if you want to join in, then please do. We're reading from this one, which is the Steve Ellis translation with the very funny, but you can read whatever you like. So full details are in Kieran's announcement video on his channel. So have a look at that. But yeah, we're going to be reading this now. Because I've been wanting to read this for a while, I wanted to kind of prepare myself. And so this month I've been mainly reading books that are going to be preparing me for Dante. However, I did kind of make a couple of detours along the way, which has resulted in a kind of whistle-stop tour of ancient Greece and ancient Roman literature. So yes. I mean, it's kind of interesting reading these books because obviously people spend lifetimes, their life, kind of studying these texts, and I've just read them for the first time once in a month, you know. So yeah, literally, this is going to be me kind of going, oh, I thought this about it, you know. When people have kind of been like, oh, well. So yes, we shall see what happens. So I'm really uncomfortable for some reason today. Why is this? What's different? What's different today that's not... Oh, well. The first book's author that I read was Homer. Right, so I read Homer. So I read the Iliad and the Odyssey. And these are both translated by Robert Fagles. Robert Fagles is going to crop up a couple of times in this wrap-up. So yes, obviously I got both of these second-hand. Got this first. Who knows what kind of life this book has had in the past. And then I sort of... what's the word? Serendipitously, maybe? I found this in a charity shop, and I was like, oh, the Robert Fagles Iliad. All right, let's do it. So I did it. Okay, so Homer. So from what I understand, so they think there's a bit of kind of disagreement about whether Homer was... what's going on here? There's a bit of discrepancy about whether or not Homer was one person or a few people. There's kind of a legend that he was a blind guy and sort of, you know, telling all these stories. Yeah, essentially, most people think that he was around 800 BCE, I think is the thing we say now. These texts are kind of a sort of a bedrock foundation of most European literature to come afterwards. And yes, so I read them. So I read the Iliad first. So the Iliad details an episode of the Trojan War in its 9th year. It sort of covers a few weeks in the 9th year of the Trojan War, which is interesting because I would have thought, as most people would think, that this covers the Trojan War. This is about the Trojan War, but it's not. It's only about a little bit of it. So, which is interesting. Specifically, it is about the time when Achilles refuses to go to battle because Agamemnon has taken one of his slave women, Briseis. Yeah, Agamemnon has taken her for reasons, and Achilles gets very, very annoyed at that, angry at that, and so he refuses to fight, and that causes the Trojans to kind of advance more and more and more on the Grecian camps, and then you get sort of Patroclus, who is Achilles' great friend, who, you know, all that stuff happens. So yeah, it's a very sort of small part of the Trojan War, but obviously it's a big book. It's about 600 pages, I think this is, which is surprising to me. The Iliad. So it is long. I can't say that it wasn't a slog. It was a slog in some places. So the battle scenes, there's a lot of battle scenes and sort of very extended descriptions of battle and war and everything. And what tends to happen is you have every soldier that is killed is kind of given a brief, sort of a few lines of backstory. So you have, and then Ajax speared Thingimus, and Thingimus was born of Doodle Plunger and Mrs. Doodle Plunger, and he was famed for his goat herding, but now he has been speared by Ajax and it is no more, you know. But the bits of plot are very kind of engaging. Kind of, ooh. So there's a couple of things that I really liked. So first of all, there's the kind of the bookending. The poem is bookended by these fathers, Trojan fathers, coming to beg for their children from the Greeks. At the opening, you have this minor character, this father who's begging for his daughter back, who's been captured, which then results in all the events happening after that. And then at the end, you have, of course, King Priam, king of the Trojans, coming to beg for the body of his son Hector, who Achilles has killed, and is kind of like, because of what Hector did, he's kind of, you know, he's not allowing him to be buried. He's drawing him around on his horse and everything. So King Priam comes to beg for the body of his son so he can give him a proper burial. And that bit at the end, I thought was really not moving, but I thought it was very deep to go into dude bro territory. It was, there was something very sort of deep about it. You sort of have to get your scuba gear for that on. Just in the act itself of a father coming to beg for the body of his son from the man who killed him, but knowing that his son also caused great tragedy to, it's just a lot of layers. And the two men, I mean, they don't sort of forgive each other, but there is a sort of shared empathy and a sort of shared humanity, and it's sort of like, ooh, wow. So there's that, which I really liked. And then, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, so like I loved the very, very ending of this, because I loved the kind of the juxtaposition of because the opening is sort of the famous opening of rage, goddess rage, tell of the rage of Achilles and on the carrions and the clouds, and it's very that gods and goddesses. But then the ending, in sort of comparison, is really kind of simple. It's got this really kind of simple line. The last line is really kind of like, but it's kind of loaded with and charged with kind of like with what's going to happen afterwards. So I really like that. I was like, ooh, that's great. And this translation is really fabulous. I would really recommend this translation by Robert Fagles, because it's kind of it's in verse, if you can see, but it's kind of really accessible and kind of not sort of, it's kind of simple enough to read, but also kind of engaging and stuff. So it is a bit of a slog at some points, but yes, I enjoyed it. And then straight after, I read the Odyssey. So this obviously is about Odysseus, or Ulysses, and his 10-year journey back home after the Trojan War. So one of the really big surprising things about this that I was like, ooh, right, okay, is that the journey home, the big journey home with all the monsters and everything, and Circe, is only the first half. He makes it home halfway in the book. And then the second half is basically about him plotting with his son Telemachus? His son, plotting on how to seek revenge on these, on his wife's suitors. So his wife Penelope, she's obviously still at home, and she's sort of waiting on her husband for 20 years, and she has all these kind of nasty suitors who've come to kind of try and convince her that she's a widow, and so that she can marry one of them, and then they can kind of inherit all the wealth and stuff. And she's like, no, Odysseus is alive, I know it. But they're there and sort of, drinking and stuff and shagging the servants and everything. And then Odysseus comes and he sort of finds all this stuff, and he kind of, the second half of the book is basically him trying to sort of plot how he's going to seek revenge in quite a sort of bloody fashion. So this is a lot more kind of, I'd say, enjoyable than the Iliad is. It's just because more stuff happens, more variety of stuff happens in it. So you have like lots of monsters and stuff. Yeah, and you have all the women that kind of fall in love with him on the way, and all the rest of it, like Circe and everything. So yes, and then like the second act. I mean, the second half. I mean, it does sort of build tension. I was really surprised by how it was like that's what the second half is. And it does lead to a very satisfying, if very kind of like sort of violent slaughter, with Odysseus kind of killing all these suitors, and kind of then taking it a sort of a next step by then killing all the serving women who kind of helped these suitors, which is kind of like what? But yes, no, I liked it. And one thing, because I've read a few sort of modern retellings of these books, and it's interesting sort of going back to the source and sort of seeing, so for instance, I mean, like in this, I was really hoping that there would be like and then did Achilles and Patroclus snog each other, but no, there isn't any of that. Madeline Miller lied to me. But yeah, no, I'd definitely read I'd recommend reading the Odyssey first, just because it is more exciting. You don't need to read the Iliad before, but a lot more stuff happens in it, and it's kind of got but it's got an interesting narrative structure, this one, because it kind of it starts in the middle, in media res. It starts in the middle, sort of Christopher Nolan-esque. It sort of starts in the middle, then sort of works back before you kind of go forward. It's sort of interesting to me. Yeah, it's just interesting how narrative storytelling was kind of this complex even back 800 years BCE. So I'm glad I've read them now. I hath read Homer, and I suppose the next thing to do would to be reading is to read other translations of it. But yeah, I recommend Robert Fagles because, as I say, it's sort of easy, accessible to read, but it's still sort of like it still feels Okay, so from war and sort of very sort of masculine men doing masculine things, I went straight on to Sappho. Sappho Club. Faso is fascinating. Sappho is fascinating. So Sappho is a poet, and she, I believe it's sort of around 600 BCE, I think they say. I think there's only like 2 complete poems that we have now, and the rest are only kind of like fragments and like little bits of poems. But she was really influential in her day. I think Plato called her the 10th muse. Yeah, so this is translated by Aaron Poochigian. I want to say. So this is the first time me encountering and reading Sappho. And so the poems are about a lot of things, but they are about love and about different types of love. And there's ones about Troy in there, which is interesting. And this edition, I really like this edition because you have the poems on one side and then like a big kind of like analysis explanation on the other side, even if it's like tiny fragments. And some of them are just like, even though they're sort of very small fragments of poems, they do kind of like get to the heart. So for instance, this one is like a gale smiting an oak on mountainous terrain, Eros with a stroke shattered my brain, savage is my flesh. Yeah, so there's just, I'm sort of reading, I'm having to sort of stop myself from reading them again. So yes, there's ones about love and death and everything, and yeah, they're just really, really interesting. Now, so I really enjoyed reading this, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then I watched Hannah from Hannah's Books. She has 2 videos on Sappho, which I thoroughly recommend you watch. And the second one is about translating Sappho, and she kind of goes through various different translations and the difficulties that translators have with Sappho. And she talks about this translation. Yeah, when I was reading it, I was like, oh, I really like this. But then watching that video and sort of hearing other interpretations of these poems, she has a bit of she has sort of criticisms about this translation, which I sort of like, oh, yes, I can sort of see why you do, because Aaron Poochigian, he's taken a little bit of liberties with these. He's kind of like joined up where words or things are missed out. He's kind of like attempted to sort of join things up and make it flow a little bit more, which is kind of like Do you do that? Is that something that you should do? Other translators have kind of purposefully left those bits out, and it kind of makes it more of a mysterious thing. So I definitely want to read another kind of translation of Sappho. But yes, but having said that, I do really like this version. I do like the the analysis and stuff. So yes, I thoroughly recommend Sappho.
Sophocles.
Okay, so we have yet more sort of detours. So from a woman giving these very sort of short bursts of emotional intensity with love, sort of expressing it very kind of intensely, to a bunch of blokes sitting around analysing it, as we do. I read Plato's Symposium. Yeah, so this was pretty much a what's it called? Spur of the moment. I was like, oh, I want to read some Plato. Yeah, so I read this. Now this is really wild. This really surprised me in a very, very good way. Yeah, it's wild. It's very, very funny, which really surprised me. Yeah, so it's about a group of guys sitting around drinking wine and sort of analysing and trying to sort of pinpoint what love is, what the god of love is, who the god of love is, and what love is. And so you get these sort of big speeches about different sort of types of love, I guess. And they kind of get more and more ridiculous as the book goes on. And then it culminates in Socrates kind of going, "Oh yes, but none of you have thought about it this way," and they're all going, "Ooh." Yeah, so there's a few sort of surprising things about this. So I mean, one of them is, what's his name? Aristophanes' speech in particular is kind of interesting. And anyone who has watched Hedwig and the Angry Inch, the Origin of Love song, that was from this. I was reading it. I was like, oh, that's Origin of Love song from Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Fair enough. So yeah, so there's you get a few speeches about love and stuff, which are interesting. And you get Socrates who says, "Oh yes, but love is actually like this." But then, once he's finished, Socrates' ex comes in very, very drunk. And he's like, "I'm going to tell you a thing I say about Socrates." And it's just very, very funny. So yes, I was very, very surprised. And I'm definitely going to reread this again at some point. Because I just thought it was funny, interestingly. So we're sort of going back in time before going forwards. But next I read Sophocles, the 3 Theban plays. So this includes the most famous one, which is Oedipus the King, or Oedipus Rex, which is the one. It's interesting. This is translated by Robert Fagles again, and it's interesting reading plays because I don't think this has been written to be performed. I think this has been written to be read, because usually plays aren't written to be read; they're written to be performed. But I think in this case, I think it has been written to be read, because I can't really imagine a production of this text really, unless it was very, very stylized. So yeah, so I enjoy. Obviously, Oedipus the King or Oedipus Rex is the best one. It's like it's been called like the perfect play, and yes, it kind of is in a way. It's got the massive twist, or kind of the reversal. Yeah, it's interesting. I liked reading it, and also because I hadn't really read the other two really either, like Antigone, and was it Oedipus at Colonus, Oedipus at Colonus, or Colonus. Yeah, I think in terms of enjoyment, I liked Oedipus the King, then Antigone, and then Oedipus at Colonus. But yeah, I was in a production of Oedipus, and it was in a really strange production at Battersea Arts Centre way back in the day. And I played Creon. So yeah, it was interesting to reread it again and sort of go back to that. But yeah, I'd like to sort of get into more Greek drama and sort of just check it out, Like I might sort of have a go at Medea and things, because this is the thing about when you when you read these things, is that you do kind of, everything sort of references each other, and so yeah, I kind of want to see what else is going on. So I might read more Greek tragedy. But then yes, so then I read Aristotle. The Poetics by Aristotle, and now this is a reread because this is on our reading list when I did my masters, along with Plato's the Theory of Art chapter in the Republic, Plato's Republic. It's up there. Can't be bothered to get it, but I read that as well, reread that as well, and yeah, so it was. Yeah, it was interesting, kind of like rereading this, and Aristotle is very, very analytical about what makes. It's basically about what makes good drama and what makes a good epic poem and stuff, and how, and he basically uses Oedipus Rex or Oedipus the King as a sort of framework of how you should do it. You know, in kind of having a beginning, middle, and end, and having a reversal, and having characters who are I can't remember, like honourable character. I can't really remember. And he sort of gives Oedipus, Sophocles, as kind of like the basis of how you should be doing it. So yeah, a lot of the thing is that we have to sort of compare Aristotle to Plato, and Plato in the Republic, he's like, oh, art is dangerous, and you know, if art can, you know, make us emotional, and that's not good because we need to not be emotional. Whereas Aristotle is like, no, drama is good because it makes us question stuff, and yes, we learn things from asking questions and stuff. So yeah, interesting. So next up, I read the Aeneid by Virgil. So in terms of reading stuff for Dante, this is a fairly big one because obviously, well, not obviously, but in the Divine Comedy, Dante is accompanied by Virgil into the underworld. I'm going to get sun in my eyes in a minute. Yeah, so this is kind of like, so I was really, really interested to read something by Virgil, and why kind of Dante sort of chose him as the guide and everything. So this was kind of published after his death. I think Virgil didn't want this to be published because he went back over and over and over again. He was like, I can't get it right. He wanted it to be burnt, but he went against his wishes and published it after his death, which is sort of right towards the end of the 1st century BCE. So this is interesting in that it is kind of Virgil's take on a Homeric epic poem. It's basically like amalgamating the Iliad and the Odyssey together, but for Roman audiences and for Roman means. And yeah, so it is an interesting one. So I did find the first half is much more interesting than the second half, and the first half is kind of the Odyssey rip-off. It's the Odyssey kind of bit of the poem, where Aeneas, who is a fighter in the Trojan War for the Trojans, so after the fall of Troy, Aeneas escapes with a load of people, and he is given a prophecy that he's going to found Rome. So he kind of leads these people through kind of an Odyssey-esque adventure, with the same kind of monsters and people, up to Italy. And on the way, he encounters Dido of Carthage, who is fabulous. That bit is really, really fabulous. She sort of, through goddess means, she is made to sort of fall in love hopelessly with Aeneas, and things do not go well. And then also, Aeneas is taken to see his father in the underworld, and it's this bit that Dante has sort of used as inspiration for the Divine Comedy when he goes into the underworld. I think it's what I've read. And in the underworld, particularly in the kind of the hell bits, there's different punishments for different types of sins. And he has a guide with him, the Sibyl. So it's sort of, people have said it's clear like where Dante got his inspiration from with that book, which is book 6, I believe, where he goes into the underworld. I thought that was interesting. The second half is the Iliad bit, and I didn't really find it very interesting at all, to be honest with you. So he gets there, and initially, the native people, the natives of Italians, are like, yes, come in, yes, it's fine, you can sort of settle here, it's fine. But then, of course, Juno. Is it Juno or Yeah, Juno. Yeah, she's like, no, they can't have a nice time. So she, along with some other gods, they kind of they spur on everyone to kind of cause this big war and everything. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of like an Iliad retread, but kind of less interesting, in my opinion. Yeah, it just sort of goes on and on a bit. I did like the end, but yeah, apart from that, I was like, But the first half of this is really, really fabulous, and I did like it a lot. Also, it has, if anyone sort of like misses, the Trojan horse in the Iliad, it has the Trojan horse, and it sort of recounts in kind of gory detail the fall of Troy. So that's sort of interesting about it. So yes, and also, I mean, I think also because there's a kind of like a propaganda type thing with this poem in kind of wanting to trace kind of mythological figures down to Augustus, who was the emperor at the time, and sort of say like, Augustus is so great. So yeah, so there's a bit of that, particularly in the second half, which I was like, ugh. But no, it was interesting, and I'm glad I read it. But I didn't like it as much as Homer. Okay, and lastly, there's these two books which were recommended in a lot of these books. I've read because I watched Jennifer Brooks's video, what to read before Dante, before the Divine Comedy, basically, and she lists a few different kind of interesting people, and of them I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to read this." So I read Horace, the complete Odes and Epodes. This is translated, but I haven't been saying who any of these are translated by, but never mind, they'll be in the description box. So this is translated by W.G. Shepard. So I read the Odes. So I can't say that this was a particularly satisfying reading experience. Obviously, this is quite an old edition with the kind of Penguins, but I think if you were to buy this new, this is the translation that Penguin still uses, I think. So Horace is apparently he is one of the 4 poets that Virgil in the Divine Comedy cites as the greatest poets of all time, sort of thing. So that includes Homer, Ovid, who I've read, Metamorphoses, Horace, and then this guy called Lucan. So yeah, I was interested to see sort of why Horace is seen as a thingamabob. And I read the Odes, and it's interesting reading this book because it's a situation where I think I would like this poet. I think I'd like Horace's work. However, I did not get along with the translation at all. I think it was just very... Am I blinding you? I think it was just very... just sort of almost impenetrable, and some really sort of strange sort of obscure word choices. And it's from the 80s, this translation. And I'm not saying it's dated, but I'm just saying it's just weird. It's like very kind of... Yeah. Because I was doing some sort of comparisons, any kind of translation I could find online about of Horace's poems I was looking at, and it doesn't need to be this difficult. Essentially, the poems, the Odes, are about a number of things. There's ones about love and about friendship. A lot of them are to do with like giving advice to his friends. So his most famous one is the kind of the Carpe Diem poem, which is most often translated as "Seize the Day," which is 111, I think. Be wise, decant the wine, prune back your long-term hopes. Life ebbs as I speak, so seize each day and grant the next no credit. Yes, so there's that one. And then there are a few, similar to Virgil, there are a few poems which are Augustus is so great, Augustus is so great, G-R-E-A-T, Augustus is so great. So there's that one. So there's a few ones like that, particularly towards the end. But yes, so it's the same with this translation. So I was going to read the Epodes, which apparently are much more tongue-in-cheek and more funny. But then my eye was drawn immediately to a racial slur in one of them, and I was like, "What? What?" And I was like, "I don't think that word was about in Latin." And so I did some sort of Googling, and I looked and I was like, yeah, I mean, no, this is kind of just completely unnecessary choice of William G. Shepard. Just a really sort of, yeah, I was like, no. So I don't think I'm going to keep this copy. If I did keep it, I'd keep it as a kind of like an analysis, because I think, as I say, I'd like to sort of have another go with Horace with another translator. So if I did keep this, it would only be, that's better. It would only be for kind of analytical purposes, and maybe I can't be bothered. So yeah, but just sort of unnecessary. I mean, that was unnecessary, but then also just unnecessary obscure words and kind of weird clause, sentence structures and stuff. So yeah, there we go. And then the last book I'm going to talk about in terms of all this stuff is a DNF. So I read a bit close to you, I read St. Augustine, The Confessions.
Illicit Confessions.
So I wanted to read this one, similarly because Jennifer Brooks recommended it, but also because this is kind of like a link between, because St. Augustine was a Roman poet, who Duff did know it. He was born in what is now Algeria, then Hippo, St. Augustine of Hippo, and he moved to, he sort of moved around a bit, but essentially he was a Roman poet, who Duff did know it. But yeah, so this is like the link between Roman sort of mythology, poetry, and then moving on into kind of the Christian era. So this is his Confessions. This is basically recounting his conversion into Christianity. And yeah, so I got halfway. I have to say I got halfway, and then I sort of realised, why am I reading this? Because I just wasn't really getting much from it, because it is very, very it's a very important religious text, and theology students and ministerial students and people read it today. And it's the bits that were interesting to me are I was more interested in the bits where he's sort of more in a quandary and sort of questioning stuff a little bit more. There's moments where he sort of goes on these sort of big question tirades about, like what is, and sort of logical, trying to be sort of logical about it, like the nature of evil and the origin of evil, and why is there evil in the world if there is a God, an all-loving God? Why is there evil in the world? And he sort of goes on into these sort of into these big sort of quandaries, and I like that. And at the beginning, there's one about him being a baby, and was he sinful as a baby, all this sort of stuff, before he found God, and so I liked that, because that's kind of like that's what people debate today still, about God and stuff. So that I liked. The bits where he took a more sort of certain, the sort of more instructional bits, I was like, okay. And as it was sort of leading into the second half, I was like, it was sort of leading more into that kind of, not preachy, but just kind of like, oh yes, this is what is what and stuff. And I was like, oh. And so eventually, I found myself, I was like sort of skim reading a lot of it, and then I was thinking, why, if I'm skim reading to this degree, then there's no point in me really carrying on. So I did DNF it. However, I'm going to keep it alongside thingy, so when I read Divine Comedy and I need it, then I will go back to it. But yeah, so certain bits were interesting and certain bits were not. So yes, so that is my... Oh, right, let's have a look. So this is basically my preparation for the Divine Comedy. Now, there's about a week left of September, so I'm going to just take a big break and just read a lot of sort of newer books. And yes, I shall report back once that has happened. Hello. Here we are. We have a change in situations. I'm currently house sitting in London, trying not to murder my friend's plants, which is all good. So yes, different surroundings. Also, I keep losing flipping hairbands, so I'm looking a bit sort of wild and I don't know, sort of Bronte-ish today. Right, so I've got 3 more books to talk about, and they're all Booker Prize shortlist ones. So yes, the Booker Prize shortlist. So I'm quite excited this year because I think I'm going to be able to read most of the shortlist before the winner is announced, which is quite cool. Which I've never done that before. Last year, I think I read 4 of the shortlist, but like way, way, way after Sugar Bane was announced. But this year, things will be a bit different. So I know for a fact that I'm not going to be able to get to Great Circle before November the 3rd, just because in October I've got a whole bunch of... I'm going to be reading Dante's Inferno. I really want to try and finish Wives and Flipping Daughters. Then I want to read Don Quixote. And then there's a whole bunch of books I want to... So yeah, I'm not going to be able to get round to another 600 plus page book. Sorry, Great Circle. Sorry, Maggie Shipstead. But obviously if it wins, then I'll obviously read it. But the others, yes, I mean, I've already read 3, so that's half. I'm definitely getting to Bewilderment, and then the only other one is The Promise, which I think I can get round to. So yeah, I'll be able to read 5 out of the 6 before the winner is announced, so that'll be interesting. So yes, but before that, I've read 3 of them, so let's have a look. 2 of them were supplied to me by Bob the Bookerer, so I'm very grateful to him for these books. So the first one was A Passage North, and this is by Anuk Aradpragasm. And this is set in not Somalia, that's the other one. This is set in Sri Lanka. And yes, and it's about death, meditations on death and life and love and Right, so this is interesting. So it's a very, very meditative novel. It's basically involves characters looking out of windows and thinking back, you know. So the basic premise is that you have Krishnan, who's this young man living in Colombo, I think, in Sri Lanka. Yeah, so he lives with his mother and his grandmother, and he gets the news that his grandmother's former carer has died in a sort of like a freak accident. And so he has to make his way up to the northeast of Sri Lanka, where there has been, 30 years of war. He has to make his way up there to attend her funeral. And yes, so this is not a plot-driven novel very much. It's very much, that's the basic premise, and it's about his journey up there and then the funeral. But what makes the book up is these long, long meditations and reflections about his life and about death and stuff. It's made up. It's big blocks of text and very, very long sentences. And yeah, as I say, it's Krishnan looking out of windows and thinking back, so there's not really much immediate kind of plot going on. I don't particularly mind these sorts of novels, which are very kind of, not so much about plot, but about thinking about stuff. And particularly with Sri Lanka, there's a lot of talk about the war that happened and reflecting about death and violence and things. And Krishnan has this sort of guilt about him living in the south of the country and sort of kind of avoiding a lot of the violence that a lot of people in the same country faced. The bits of the book which I wasn't so interested in were the bits to do with a formal relationship. That kind of, I wasn't too bothered about that. But yes, no, I found it interesting. It's not completely arresting. I wasn't kind of completely blown away by it, but I did like a lot of it. And yeah, there is a sort of a stylized nature of it with these long sentences and kind of, it's not sort of secure. It's not like Milkman or anything like that. It's not kind of circuitous, but it does kind of, yeah, it's about the themes rather than the plot. And I get the feeling, it's in the third person, and I haven't really watched any interviews with the author, but I get the feeling that it's the author's kind of quandaries, his own sort of thoughts in a novel sort of thing. I don't know if I'm talking rubbish, but that's the impression that I got. Yeah, do I think it's going to win? I don't know. I'd be surprised if it won. I'd be like, oh, okay. It's a fairly kind of, it didn't really make a big impact with me, but yes, it would be a kind of oh, fair enough, if this won, but we'll see. Philosophical novel. Yeah, it is a philosophical novel. And I think he studied philosophy, the author, and stuff. So I don't think it's for everyone, because it is very kind of drawn out. But I did find it interesting. to be warned, I mean, there is some pretty horrific discussions and descriptions about war and about torture and stuff, which which are pretty horrifying to read, obviously. An interesting one. Next up, I don't have it with me because I got it from the library. I've joined my local library, but I read No One Is Talking About This. Right, so this is a pretty divisive novel, isn't it? I liked it. So basically, No One Is Talking About This is all about kind of social media. It's a meme Twitter culture, basically. It's about a woman who has become sort of Twitter famous through a viral tweet, a sort of a jokey tweet that she did. She spends most of her time going around the globe, going to events and talking about the internet, and yeah, so sort of similar to, I believe this is kind of like auto-fiction. I believe like Patricia Lockwood, it's sort of very, almost sort of autobiographical. Yeah, so she kind of lives, she doesn't live online, but a lot of her focus and attention is online, on Twitter, kind of with this jokey, sardonic, memey sense of humour, until an event in her family causes her to causes the need to sort of shift her focus to very much the present and to family members, and to kind of reevaluate her attention, basically. Right, so this is a very, very divisive book. And why is that? Well, it's a divisive book because of its style. So the first half, well, all of it, but the first half particularly, is made up. So it's not like a kind of continuous thread, usual paragraphs and speech marks and stuff. You get these little kind of bits, these little kind of paragraphs of kind of thoughts of like little events. And basically, it took me a couple of pages to sort of realize what was going on. But basically it's told, how do you describe this novel? The structure of it is like you're scrolling through social media, sort of. The second half is where plot happens and where you have this family event, tragedy, which causes her to kind of focus her attention away from the social media, more away from her social media presence. However, the style doesn't change, so you still have these little bits, but now the focus isn't about Mimi kind of it's about focusing on her family, but with the same structure and kind of also with this same sense of humor kind of thing, which is kind of a little bit of gallows humor, kind of a little bit sort of wry eyebrow raise humor, and very sort of in-jokey humor, kind of referencey stuff. Also, I mean, I did a master's in playwriting a couple of years ago, and we had a lecturer, our main lecturer actually, and her main, well, not a main thing, but a big bit of her sort of her teaching, I guess, was that the structure of your play should marry up with what you want to say, with the politics of your play. So for example, it's no use kind of, if you want to say something really radical, it's no use kind of using a traditional 3-act structure, kind of drawing room, early 20th century structure, because then it's like, it doesn't sort of marry up. That was her argument. And so she sort of tried to kind of get us to think about structure and form in a way that kind of reflected the politics of, or the message of the play of itself. And of course that kind of can be reflected in other things as well. And I thought that Patricia Lockwood, she's sort of done a similar thing. She's kind of used the essence, I guess, of social media, the essence of what scrolling through a feed does, of kind of having different bits of information, sporadic bits of information, as well as having a kind of weird sense of humor with in-jokes and kind of that kind of, and then talked about being present, and being, and where our attention lies when it comes to kind of personal tragedy. I think Patricia Lockwood sort of has done that in her novel very well, I thought. But yeah, it is divisive, and a lot of people won't like this book because it's kind of I don't know. It is. Some people might think it's gimmicky, but I didn't think it was gimmicky, basically. A way for this year's prize to be controversial would be if this book won, because it is so divisive. But yes, but I'd be, I don't know, I'd be happy if it won. I think. I mean, yeah, I've only read one other book, but yeah, it'll be interesting if this one, because I think it would be a risk. It would be kind of like a risk because a lot of people don't like it, but a lot of people do like it. But yes, and also because it's kind of it's very much dated now. It's a very sort of now novel, and whether it will age well will be remains to be seen. And saying it's a now novel, really, it's a kind of a 2 years ago novel, really, if we're thinking about it, just because of what's referenced and because it's pre-pandemic, and kind of that kind of meme culture. Although I think that will sort of last for a little bit. The kind of the references obviously are going to date this novel considerably as it sort of ages. So I don't know how that will filter in the judges' deliberations, but yes, we shall see. But it did make me laugh out loud a good few times, and yeah, I did appreciate the sort of the second half's turn into more serious subject matter, but still sort of keeping the same structure and the same kind of sardonic wash, even though it's quite sort of tough subject matter. So yes, I'm clutching my pearls. So yeah, I liked it. And then lastly, the last book I wrote, this is another one from Bob the Bookerer, which I will be giving back to him soon. But I read The Fortune Men. This is by Nadifa Mohamed. So I've literally just finished this about half an hour ago. And right, so this is based on a true story. It's set in the 50s in Tiger Bay in Cardiff, and it's because it's based on a true story, I don't want to sort of give away much, but basically it's about a miscarriage of justice. And this Somali man who's living in Cardiff, he gets charged for the murder of this woman, which he didn't do. And basically it's about the lead up to that, and also the lead up to his trial, the actual trial itself, and the consequences of that trial. So I have to say, reading this, I can't say I was completely sort of I didn't really allow myself to get completely immersed in this book for a couple of reasons. I mean, firstly, I'm not going to go too much into this, but in the UK at the moment we've got quite a high-profile murder case in the media at the moment, and whilst justice has been served with that, this thing about injustice and about thing was just sort of ringing in my ears. It's completely different context to this, but this thing about police and all that sort of stuff, it was just in my head as I was reading this, and so I didn't really allow myself to kind of get fully immersed into this book, because I was sort of like, there was something about it. I'm not sure whether it was its length or certain things, because she does go into great detail. I think one thing she does is that one thing she does really well is that she gives this kind of she gives a lot of detail about the protagonists. I think his name's Mahmoud Matan. Yes, Mahmoud Matan. She gives like a whole kind of backstory and very sort of detailed things about his character, and also lots of things that are lots of layers to his character, which sort of allows us to kind of be fully invested in him, and which makes kind of the injustice of it all much more powerful, I guess. I think maybe it's too soon for me to be talking about this book, because I have literally just finished it. But yes, if it won, then I wouldn't be surprised if it won, but I would need to read it again, kind of, but with kind of more of like I need to sort of invest in it more, because there was sort of bits that I wasn't skim reading it, but I just wasn't letting myself be involved too much, because it is a true story, and because yeah, I just wasn't really in the frame of mind because of recent events to kind of be in a kind of true story about injustice to this level. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't think I'm ready to talk about this book yet. But yeah, I think having just read it, I think the things that she's done with the detail in the world, with all the different characters, with not just with Mahmoud Matan, but with the victim's family, talking about grief in that sort of way. And I think there's some really kind of powerful, towards the end, some really, really powerful things with the protagonist trying to sort of, yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, it's just very, very powerful passages in it. But yeah, no, essentially, I liked it. I thought it was very powerful, particularly towards the end, but I will need to reread it to properly talk about it again. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, so now I have Bewilderment to read, which I'm getting for my birthday, and then I think I should be able to get round to The Promise. As I say, I'm not going to be able to get to The Great Circle, I don't think. But if that wins, then I will read it afterwards, subsequently. So yes, we shall see. But of the three, I think my favourite thus far is the Lockwood. Is no one is talking about this, but I wouldn't be surprised if either of these two made it. Well, I'd be a little bit surprised if this made it, just because it would be kind of like a safe-ish choice, I think. Even though I liked it and I appreciated it. Yeah, it's completely opposite to the way it talks about grief and its structure stuff. Is the complete opposite of No One Is Talking About This, which is, I find interesting. This is kind of like a normal novel in that, you have actual mid-length paragraphs and speech marks and stuff. And it's a very, very important subject matter, and a very, very yeah, it's very important subject matter, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this won, and I would need to read it again if it did, and I do need to reread it again actually. Anyway, but yes. So there we go. This is going to be a long one, a lot of books. I am going to be starting The Divine Comedy, and yeah, I'll leave links down below about ways you can be involved with that. So do join us if you want to. And yes, I'm going to try and find my hairbands and have a nice time. So yes, thank you for watching if you've been watching. I hope everyone is all right. And yes, bye-bye.